many people, even very ardent supporters, were confused or maybe even very upset by Zohran Mamdani keeping on Jessica Tisch as NYPD police commissioner. But why back Hakeem Jeffries?
I would have said don't do that probably. I would love probably a little more information about why that decision was made.
Do you guys have influence with him? And then what does accountability look like moving forward?
We're learning a lot as we go along over this past decade about thinking about how we govern within the United States in the belly of the beast, like knowing that left governments around the world have really struggled with a lot of these basic questions.
I and everybody who is a socialist who's like thrown down for this is going to have these moments where it's like, damn, that sucks.
As we're in a moment where Venezuela could be attacked, do you see Zohran Mamdani being the kind of person who will be kind of giving his voice and leadership to the anti-war movement?
He showed up at Cuba solidarity events over time, including, I think, possibly during the campaign. So, this is something that for sure we're going to hold him accountable to.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. DSA just won one of the most significant left-wing electoral victories in recent memory, with Zohran Mamdani as mayor of New York. And that's despite being red-baited, smeared as a terrorist sympathizer, and subjected to an aggressive anti-Palestinian, anti-socialist smear campaign. But that victory has also raised big questions about strategy, anti-genocide politics, anti-imperialism, movement integrity, and the future of democratic socialism at a national level. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by national co-chairs of the Democratic Socialists of America, Megan Romer and Ashik Siddique, to talk about the Zohran Mamdani victory, the backlash to his decisions about Hakeem Jeffries and Jessica Tisch, and accountability in this moment of war, repression, and fascist drift. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/breakthroughnews. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And smash that like button and share this episode. It helps boost us in the algorithm that hates us. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. All right, Megan and Ashik, co-chairs of the Democratic Socialists of America, welcome to Dispatches on Breakthrough News.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, really glad to be here.
Well, I'm really glad to have you all on. There is so much to talk about. I want to talk to you about the exciting stuff. I want to talk to you about some of the more challenging stuff. It's going to be a great conversation. And I think a good place to start is, everyone's talking about DSA. Importantly, because one of your members just historically won the New York mayoral race, Zohran Mamdani, which happened, my gosh, it's almost been a month now. Probably when this episode airs, it will have been a month since he won. And he didn't just win, he won really big, despite being red-baited, despite the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the conflation of socialism with extremism, the demonization of Palestine solidarity, the insane level of Islamophobia, and on and on and on. Both parties tried to defeat him. So I guess before we kind of get into the deep stuff, what do you think this says about the political moment that we're in, that all of that failed to prevent him from being elected on the platform he ran on?
We both have a lot to say about it. But yeah, this is such a huge moment for the left, and Zohran's win comes out of years of building that New York City DSA and organizations across New York City have been building for the better part of 8 years. DSA grew very quickly after 2016, after the Bernie Sanders presidential race, but has become, a pretty fundamentally different organization over the past decade. We've built a lot of institutional power that comes out of movement organizing, that comes out of labor organizing. The electoral project that we're building is increasingly independent and, operating off of the initiative of members. Zohran himself comes out of organizing as a member. I think he joined DSA around the same time a lot of us who are members now did, in that sort of post-Bernie, Trump bump that we had, where a lot of people were looking for a real alternative. And he started as a member. He organized on some of New York City DSA's first campaigns and just came up through the ranks as a member before he became a candidate, before he even was a member of the assembly. And when he got into the assembly, it was as a block of New York City DSA socialists in office. And they had 4 years of experience operating as a bloc, being pretty antagonistic against the Democratic establishment in New York State. and working with labor unions, working with movement organizations, and just the growth of the Palestine movement in the past 2 years really can't be overstated. How that's factored into this. So, all these things really came together really powerfully. And we have a lot to do to figure out what's next and how to actually, govern from the left in a city like the wealthiest city in the world. So obviously there are tons of challenges there, but this is the biggest win for the left in the United States electorally in a century. So it comes out of a lot of hard work. It didn't come out of nowhere. And, there's a lot we need to keep doing to keep building. But, at the end of the day, DSA's theory of change is not just about electing people who have good policies, who we think are going to be nice and do the right thing in office because they're good people. We know it's collective organization. It's a whole inside-outside strategy. And there's a lot of movement pressure that needs to keep building and organizing to make all these things possible and, expand towards the socialist horizon. We know that we're not going to win socialism in one city, especially against all these incredible institutional powers. But, this is a huge step, and we see the cracks in the establishment, in, the capitalist structure, the Zionists, obviously, who are just, totally furious about this, but haven't been able to stop it so far. And all their attempts so far to stop the progress have kind of backfired and made the movement even more powerful and made many more people aware of just how shallow their power is increasingly.
And Megan, I want to kind of add to some of what I asked Ashik and throw this to you in the sense of, this obviously DSA played a huge role in this victory in organizing to get Mamdani elected. And he's been a central figure in DSA for quite some time. I think that Zohran Mamdani definitely represents someone that comes out of a movement more and that has a more politically left foundation. And so I guess I'd want you to maybe expand on that a little bit in the sense of what do you think makes Zohran Mamdani different as a political figure than maybe the AOC, the Squad, and the Bernie Sanders sort of segment of the Democrats? And I guess I maybe speak to that significance here because I think that's pretty crucial.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie's a unique example because he's like our weird old uncle, right? He's been holding it down for so long, and you hear him sometimes you're like, yes, Bernie, and then other times you're like,
you're like, oh God, okay, fine.
All right, Uncle Bernie's at the table talking again. And that's just sort of how it is. He's extremely independent to the point where I don't think he is organizing with people. I think that actually organizing is what develops our politics. And so that's why we see sort of a different crop of kind of organizer politicians coming out in the last couple cycles in a way that, AOC had done some organizing, but it was kind of in the old school NGO model. And so she maybe was a bridge between Bernie, who just read a stack of books, right? He hadn't organized since the 70s. So he's, whatever. We love Bernie, also weird uncle. AOC had come out of a sort of NGO organizing milieu. And then you go in generation's a weird thing to say because it's 3 years, right? But you go a few years and you get people who had come up through organizing because all of this is developing really fast, right? The organized left in the US had gotten so small because of the Red Scare, because of various policies and decisions that were made to make sure it stayed small. Sometimes on both sides. So yeah, you see these sort of organizer politicians, right? Who because they're organizing with comrades, because they're engaging in this sort of work of democracy, they're always kind of developing their ability to analyze a situation, to read the political moment, and to come up with solutions for problems that are both big and kind of horizon-y and also immediate problems in front of them, and know how to kind of work within a movement, right? Sometimes you have to convince people of your ideas. Sometimes you're gonna have, because you're in a certain role, because you're already in leadership or something, you're going to be able to say things and people are going to be like, yeah, probably that's fine. Other times you're going to have to really work to make people agree with you and be ready to throw down the work for it. So Zohran really comes out of that milieu where he has been a leader, he's a trusted leader, but also knows how to personally actually get people to do work, but also to find people who can so much of organizing his delegation. And so he, found a good batch of people right below him to kind of deal with field and comms and all those things. So it's coming out of that organizing milieu is going to mean not only a powerful political, machine ability, but also the constant and regular feedback that lets you really be a politician of the people and really hear from the folks who you're there to represent.
And with that in mind, of course, there's a couple things that have taken place where, I think after there was like the excitement of the winning, and then a few weeks have gone by, a few things have happened. And I think we can look at some of these things with a bit more of a critical eye. And I would imagine, DSA is looking at some things with more of a critical eye too. So I'd love to get your perspective on this, because as I'm sure you've seen, many people, even very ardent supporters, were confused or maybe even very upset by Zohran Mamdani keeping on Jessica Tisch as NYPD police commissioner. And I want to ask this very respectfully, but also very honestly, because this is, a lot of this is coming from activists, especially Palestinians, especially students who have been active around that issue, because we know that Tisch is not some neutral person. I mean, I know you guys know, I'm just kind of laying this out for the audience. She comes from this very billionaire Zionist family. She oversaw the NYPD crackdown on the 2024 pro-Palestine campus encampments. She defended the mass arrests at Columbia and CUNY. She basically helped train the NYPD to understand the keffiyeh and the watermelon as symbols of anti-Semitism, and, sort of on and on and on. She's very hawkish when it comes to the genocide in Gaza, because I guess there is like a spectrum of support for genocide somehow in this country. And she's a pretty ardent supporter of it. So all that's to say, obviously the criticism has been that he's kept her on. So the question, I guess, from like the movement people becomes, why keep someone who actively criminalizes the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and who Trump, by the way, even loves for that very reason, among others. And maybe there is, I'd love to hear from you guys. I don't know, maybe you guys are critical of this as well. Like what is the political or moral logic behind that decision? And I guess, where does DSA stand on that decision?
Yeah, I can start answering. I think, there's a whole range of, it's a big question that is really hard. I don't think any of us, I don't think either of us are happy about, keeping somebody like that on. I think it raises a lot of big questions about, just about power and about governing that, we're not coming into this with a fully fleshed out program for how we govern a city like New York City and enact a left agenda. So I think, part of this is being self-critical and honest about what we think our power is. And there's going to be a whole range of perspectives across, like within DSA, across the broader left. And I think people should be critical and have a critical eye about roles like these. To me, just even before this decision came to appoint Jessica Tisch, or reappoint her, a lot of questions were coming up about just how to orient to policing in general, like just knowing that he could win and then be in charge of the NYPD, which is larger than many militaries around the world, right? Just at a basic level, that's a big thorny question that I think people in left governments in like throughout the global south have struggled with. Throughout Latin America, this has been a pretty critical question of like how does the left party relate to the military, right? So I think just with the left being so new, like everything Megan was saying about how we're learning a lot as we go along over this past decade about thinking about how we govern within the United States in the belly of the beast, like knowing that left governments around the world have really struggled with a lot of these basic questions. I don't think there are easy answers. And I think around policing in particular, this has been something that the left has really struggled with since 2021. A year after the uprisings, Black Lives Matter, where this was just the most animating cause for people across the country, not just on the left. But then the reaction to abolition, to defund police demands was clearly so much stronger than what the movement was ready for, and the movement energy dissipated for a lot of reasons that I think a lot of us are still unpacking. Within DSA, I think there's still a lot of conversations that we're kind of overdue to have. And I think across the left, people are really overdue to have about what we think is the near-term program for tackling policing. Like all of the issues that we were talking about in 2020 are still there, right? They haven't gone away. I guess I'll say, like, this doesn't directly answer your question, but a lot of people, I think, even beyond DSA, I've heard from abolitionist organizers who were, fully engaged in the protests throughout that year. A lot of their conclusion was kind of that, just the anti-demand, like saying no to policing and the whole carceral infrastructure, got ahead of what was always part of an abolitionist vision, which is that actually we should have public goods, we should have all these social services, all these positive things. That's part of an abolitionist vision. But kind of the negative framing got ahead, and the right wing and liberal centrists like fully ran with that fear mongering about public safety. All of that just like seeped in so deeply, including and especially with working class people. Like Eric Adams was elected mayor of New York City in 2021 as the black cop in chief, right. And he had strong working class support from Black and immigrant New Yorkers. Like I was shocked to hear in my extended family in New York City suddenly being very concerned about public safety and absorbing a lot of these narratives that a few years ago that was not the case. So I think these are things that, it's hard, but I think a lot of people on the broader left, including many abolitionists, have focused more on, the positive. Like how do we show that we can have these positive things like social services, like a vision of community safety that's not based in just expanding policing, but the way that Zohran talked about it in this campaign was these other community safety programs, which, basically does, at least for now, leave in place a lot of the bad things that we agree are bad. So
I totally understand. Like the policing issue is not, once you actually get power, it's not an easy one to deal with, especially in a city like New York. And you're absolutely right. Like when you think about Brazil and Lula da Silva and having to deal with a Brazilian policing force that like just massacred a bunch of people, like last month. So, I'm not saying like it's easy to just go in there and change everything with the swoop of a pen, but it just seems pretty extreme to keep this particular figure on. I think that's where the frustration comes in. And I want to hear from you on this, Megan, too. But I think another thing that comes to mind as this, issue of Jessica Tisch gets discussed more is, in some ways you could talk about the difference between like legislative and executive offices, right? And this is an executive office. And what I mean here is that it's kind of like, and I don't know if you guys are having these conversations. I would assume you might be, but like, what does DSA do when, let's say, the NYPD kills an unarmed man, which is bound to happen because the NYPD does that, right? And the mayor is ultimately the person in charge. So it's different than, let's say, like a lawmaker who can just like condemn the police in a speech. But when you're the mayor, it's going to be a little bit different. I think of de Blasio, who kind of started out as this like police reformer. And at first he told the police to stand down when it came to the mass protests. But ultimately he ended up caving to the police. The police kept killing people, continued brutalizing protesters. He ended up picking a very mainstream police commissioner. So this is what I think of, I guess, when I see, first of all, so many de Blasio era leaders in this new administration. But then also it's just like, how do you foresee that playing out, especially when we're starting off here keeping like just someone as hawkish as Jessica Tisch in charge? Because we can't expect the police will change their colors. This is basically inevitable, especially with ICE going to town under police supervision. So I just said a lot, but Megan, I'd love to hear from you on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to make excuses for that decision, and I think a lot of our members won't. I think this is probably one of those moments where it's worth sort of laying out, like, we're not yet a party, right? So we are not a line organization with electeds following a line that we've set. There's literally a copy of If We Burn over my head. I'm sure you've read and discussed that on your show. Ashik was talking about, like, there was this sort of mass protest around Black Lives Matter. And what ended up coming out of it was worse police conditions in just about every American city, because we didn't have, and that's Vincent Bevans's sort of thesis here, but also one that I share. We didn't have that party ready to step in and like change things. That's what happens. We have these moments of rupture. We're in one. We're not there yet to be that party that can really really shift everything as much as we want to. So part of what we're doing is building that, working, across the left to build, whether it's a party, whether it's a series of institutions, whatever that looks like. Part of that means, taking some big swings, and might knock it out of the park, might just whiff completely, might hit a line drive and run a base or two. And that's such a, wow, look at me with my baseball metaphors. Thank you. I'm all American girl today, I guess. But you don't quite know what's going to happen, but you can't just not get up to bat. And so that's part of what we're doing here. I think that decision was really disappointing. I don't have inside knowledge. I was not an insider in the campaign. We're on the org side, which is a kind of separate, and New York City DSA was really the kind of most connected. So everything's kind of coming through steps to us. But yeah, I would have said don't do that probably. I would love probably a little more information about why that decision was made. But I also, yeah, I mean, it's going to happen, right? Like, I'm going to have, I and everybody who is a socialist who's like thrown down for this is going to have these moments where it's like, damn, that sucks. Like, we threw down hard, and like, that's going to be a sucky moment. That is going to keep happening. It's going to happen not just with Zohran. It's going to happen with any elected. It's going to happen with me and Ashik as co-chairs of the organization. They're going to get mad because we did the thing that they didn't like. We're still figuring this out. And some of that is going to have to mean seeing things go badly and fix them, or maybe somebody knew something we didn't, or, any number of things, and just kind of continuing to be ruthlessly critical and learning from both mistakes and successes.
And I want to hear a bit more about the issue of like not being a party yet and what that means. I know you guys have now like hit a huge milestone, which is 90,000 members, which is huge. I mean, that's a huge number of people identifying with the word socialism and wanting to be a part of organizing around that. But I just have a few more, I guess, like critical sort of Zohran questions here, because this is what everyone's wondering. And I mean, the other issue, and I'm sure you guys have been having lots of conversations about this, is that his position on Hakeem Jeffries. And I think this is the one that kind of maybe shocked people the most. I mean, obviously, Zohran Mamdani got involved in preventing Chiose from primarying him. And I know that was like an NYC DSA issue, and there was like a vote around that. And that's one thing, the whole choosing not to primary him. And there's been a explanation of pragmatism around that. And we can maybe talk a little bit about that. But I think it wasn't just the fact of opposing a primary. It was also endorsing him for speaker in 2027. And I'm sure you guys saw the clip making the rounds of like just like an unequivocal endorsement.
If Democrats win the midterms, do you want to see Leader Jeffries become the Speaker of the House?
Yes.
Okay. That was a firm, quick answer.
And I think for people who identify as socialists, it's hard to understand because, as you all know, Jeffries is such a centrist hack. I mean, this is somebody who's been horrible on Gaza, been a loud defender, of Israel's genocide, a leading force in really crushing criticism of the Israelis. He's been really horrible on Latin America as well. And right now, we have this escalation taking place that, maybe when this comes out, we're going to see strikes against Venezuela. I mean, that's how serious this is getting. And he's really not opposing that at all, as far as I can tell. And then, I think what was the big kicker was on the day that Mamdani met Trump, in the meeting that broke the internet. You had Hakeem Jeffries joining over 80 Democrats and signing a resolution to condemn socialism. That morning, which was just like, dude, what are you doing? So I guess I'm just kind of like, how does this make sense? Why endorse him at all? Why not primary him? And I'd love to know, like, what are the conversations you guys are having on that? What's your position on that? Because at the end of the day, I mean, Mamdani won by primarying. And it's and I understand there's like a decision being made in terms of like when that's a useful thing to do and when not. But why back Hakeem Jeffries?
Yeah, this is another, big question that has 50 different strategic questions that are very live issues across our whole organization, let alone New York City DSA, which, our chapters are the ones leading the work. So I think a lot of the discussions about whether or not to endorse TOSA to primary Hakeem Jeffries happened in really robust debates in New York City DSA, which I think, everybody across the spectrum of positions on that question, had really solid debate. I got to see some of it, and a lot of it played out on Twitter. Like maybe you've seen some of it.
Yeah.
There were I myself, people I'm aligned with in New York, supported endorsing Chiose and were very vocal backers of that effort. It ended up being a pretty close vote. After there was pretty open discussion among New York City DSA members. I forget what the vote breakdown was. It wasn't enough to endorse him, obviously. But, he had a strong support base. And, it was pretty respectful across the board. Like, people laid out real strategic questions about whether or not to endorse him. A lot of questions were raised about, Chiose has joined fairly recently. There's so much that makes him an exciting candidate. But, maybe we should, I think that's kind of the argument that won out more, that we really, at this point, want and expect kind of cadre candidates who have a record of really working through our membership democracy, which is what Zohran came out of. Like almost everybody now that New York City DSA endorses comes through, some period of involvement. Chiose is committed to staying a New York City DSA member. He's very actively promoted our membership drive, encouraged people to become members, and is committing to work as a socialist in office in city council, which he didn't before, just this past month. So that's a great development. I think there are lots of good reasons to have endorsed him. I was really personally excited to see that happen. I'm really glad that he's sticking with us in the long run and, focusing on building the base, and the opposition in city council is really critical. And that was another big strategic question of how much to shore up support in city council, where DSA only has had 2 endorsed socialists in office in city council out of something like, I think it's 50 something city council members, versus the state government, where DSA has had 9 socialists in office in the state assembly and Senate, which has been a solid block to be opposition and pushing parts of a socialist agenda at the state level. We haven't had as strong a base at city council. So that's kind of been a core governing question of okay, Zohran is now in the executive position without a very strong socialist core in city council. There are, I think, plenty of progressive allies. Until recently, Chi would have been considered one, on the same page on almost every issue, but not operating as part of the bloc. So the sense is that, my sense, from the outside, again, we're leaders in the national org. New York City DSA has its own internal democracy. Enough people probably felt that it was worth having such a strong voice like Chi with such a huge platform, very charismatic, good messenger. That's a really strong asset in city council. So that was a trade-off. Everything you said about Hakeem Jeffries, we all agree. We hate him. I've been hearing for 5 years that this is a very promising primary target eventually for New York City DSA to run. I think it would have been great to do that, especially this year when Hakeem Jeffries has been demonstrating such total fecklessness and cowardice against Trump's agenda, fully enabling all this imperialist bullshit. There are all these trade-offs that people were weighing. I will say, even though I personally, that this isn't the outcome I would have wanted, but the fact that Zohran and a bunch of other socialists in office in New York showed up to the town hall the New York City DSA held, they waited online to speak just like everybody else. I think Zohran was number 5 in line to speak, to give his testimony. I think there are some people who might see that and say oh, he's throwing his weight around as an elected. But I think the way a lot of people experience that as members was wow, he's just showing up to say his piece like everybody else, and people can still disagree with him or not. Many members still disagreed. And I think that's a sign of really healthy internal democracy, that, we elect people to office, but they still, at the end of the day, in our organization, are participating as members.
No, and I do get that. And I think it's also, a question of, like you said, strategy. And it's just, I guess it's kind of on the one hand, it's you have this larger political strategy of primarying, and it sort of invalidates that for the moment, or at least it's kind of saying, well, now that this person's won power, everybody kind of has to stand down. And so it just kind of becomes confusing maybe, but I do recognize, and one thing I do appreciate about you guys is that, and I'm not at all comparing Zohran Mamdani to Obama in the sense that I think he's better than Obama. But, after Obama was elected, everybody just kind of went home. And, nothing was criticized except for on the very, very left of the sort of media spectrum, of the independent media spectrum, but nowhere else was like anything criticized. Nobody wanted to cause problems. And so I do think it's really good that these conversations are happening. They're happening openly. And people are disagreeing openly. And I do recall, like, in the last days of his election, Mamdani did make this speech, and he said this a few times, where he was like, you know, you don't just like go home after this, like you have to stay mobilized. And I think part of staying mobilized is to also hold him accountable, because at the end of the day, he's facing this massive Democratic Party machine that is way more powerful in terms of like weight than we are as individuals, right? But then at the same time, if he can like be like, there's like, you know, all these people in the streets who are gonna like, you know, come for me if I don't do what they're asking, like he can't, it'll make it harder for him to capitulate when it comes to those kinds of moments. If you have a conscience, it's unbearable to be plugged into the corporate media machine right now. These outlets are accomplices in genocide, running cover for the war machine. Breakthrough has become the go-to outlet for those who want something different. But the funds we've used to start this platform are starting to run out. We'd never dream of turning to mainstream corporate funding. So we're turning to you. Become a patron. For as little as $5 a month, you can become an essential part of our fight to not just break through the mainstream media, but create something that can challenge it. We have to become completely viewer supported, or this platform we've built could go away. Don't just watch us, join us. And I guess all that's to say, like, one thing I am noticing is there is a bit of a pattern of like, and I'm thinking maybe this is how Mamdani intends to partly govern, is, you know, he wants to neutralize the ruling class by kind of becoming friends with it. And it's certainly a strategy. I personally don't think that will work, but I mean, we'll have to see. But I'm just curious, Megan, your thoughts on all of this and where you see it going, and as an organization, like how you feel about, in terms of like, are you guys prepared to kind of push back against him when, once he actually is in office, he's going to inevitably make some capitulations that are going to make, you know, piss us all off here and there?
Well, I will say that I did not expect Trump to develop a crush on him so fast. His little crush. Like, what happened? I mean, who on this, like, anybody who's met Zohran, like, kind of gets it. You're like, yeah, it happens real quick.
He's a sorcerer.
He really, truly. I didn't expect Trump to fall for it. But then once I thought about it more, I was like, yeah, that was good. Trump likes charisma. Like, he doesn't have any ideas. He doesn't. He's a charisma guy. That's a big part of the fascist playbook, right?
Yeah.
He like, I don't think he's doing like the big thinking around it, but yeah. So I think we will probably see a little bit of respectability politics to a degree that I will be like, why aren't you just yelling at them? Why aren't you just yelling at them? But I also think, you know, I think Zohran can kind of switch back and forth between that a bit. He will like schmooze people to get a thing happening, but he'll also scream at ICE agents and get arrested. Like we've seen him do it. So I'm hoping that we can encourage the yelling at ICE agents, Zohran, to be the one who shows up as much as possible. I'm not a public office politician. I'm sure it, you know, the pressures are really weird. And I think it's really important to, from our side, both be critical when things are bad, but also be really positive when things are good. Like, yes, you're yelling at ICE agents. Great job, right? We're doing positive reinforcement. We'll show up with you to yell at ICE agents. We're into it. So I think that we're going to need to look at both of those tactics. And, you know, the pressures are going to be immense. That's how this goes. I wish we were so much stronger so that we could be able to apply as much counter pressure as there will be pressure. That I'm not sure we're there yet. We're working towards it. I do think that Zohran is committed to to letting us be more of an influence on him than you know, your average just sort of generic progressive would be. But again, yeah, there are going to be disappointing things. There are going to be really great things. How we learn from them, how we pivot, how we develop power around those things is really the question.
Well, so then I think I want to ask you guys a bit about the accountability element, because I think that speaks to like the future? And I mean, okay, so having 90,000 members, that's huge. I think I've heard you say you're like moving towards becoming a political party. And so I'd love to know, like, what does that mean? So like, what is DSA now? And like, what does that look like in terms of, let's say, influence over a candidate you got elected who's from your party, like Zohran? Like, do you guys have influence with him? And then what does accountability look like moving forward? I mean, I understand you don't have like a political line that like candidates are supposed to like abide by. So it's not like that in that place. Do you plan to be in a place where that's how DSA functions? Like, I guess describe to me those sort of mechanisms you have in terms of accountability and then influence over the electeds that are from your party who get into high office, which I guess Zohran's the highest you've ever gotten. So probably a lot of this is like testing as you go. But I guess Ashik, let's start with you.
Yeah, so Zohran is the highest office we've gotten anybody elected to anywhere in the country. So that has all the additional challenges that we're talking about of executive office actually governing. But I think just to start off with the party question, DSA is a Big Ten organization. That means our own members have a whole range of views about different questions, including, just like, what does a party structure mean? We debate them very robustly. We make democratic decisions. And our official policy, at this point, is that we're building a working class alternative to the Republicans and Democrats. Formally, that we mostly do run people in primaries on the Democratic ballot line. But in terms of party structure, we already have more of a party structure than either of those parties. Like, you can't really be a party member of the Republican or Democratic Party. Like, we talk a lot about the two-party system in this country, but it's kind of like a no-party system. These are just like huge, massive fundraising operations and like branding opportunities, right? So we've been able to use the ballot line in a way that is, taking advantage of like this particular feature of our American political system. That's not the case in a lot of other countries where people have a parliamentary system where they can formally be a party and have all the party mechanisms. There are challenges to those party mechanisms here, which, like you, I don't need to get into it probably with this audience, you all know. So yeah, it makes it difficult for a lot of structural reasons to build a formal new independent party. But that's why in this current moment, like Democratic Socialist candidates run as Democrats, though not all of them. We do have some cities where as an independent, you can get pretty far, and we elect people independently in city councils in some cities, for example. But yeah, all that to say, in terms of party structure, like members making democratic decisions together, independent fundraising, just being able to turn out hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of volunteers, like through our organization, campaigns being led and staffed by our members when a candidate is fully endorsed by our organization. Like, Zohran would not have run for mayor if he had not been endorsed by New York City DSA from the jump. And, he picked up all these other endorsements. There were other organizations in the coalition, but DSA really made it happen. And more, that kind of is the basis. Like, it's a core part of how accountability happens. There are all sorts of other things that are helpful on top of that. But at the very basis, like, that we are more and more the ones who make a candidate's entire trajectory possible and expect that it comes from within our own organizational democracy. That's a pretty core party function. So that's happening in places like New York City DSA. That's our biggest and most visible example right now. But all over the country, there are other cities like Portland, Oregon. Portland DSA has now gotten 4 members of the city council, and there might be others coming soon. Los Angeles DSA has a bunch. They might have a majority soon who are DSA members in city council. Twin Cities DSA in Minneapolis has gotten a whole slate of people. They ran Omar Fateh for mayor, coming out of a block of DSA members in office. He didn't make it, but that's another big, step up. Yeah, we could go on, but there are a bunch of chapters now that have blocks of people. So like multiple people in a body like a city council or a state legislature. And the expectation is that they're working with DSA, with elected leaders of the DSA chapter to set policy, to set strategy together, and kind of drive that long term. So in places like that, DSA kind of already is an opposition party. Like those are all, I think every city I mentioned is pretty Democratic governed. So Republicans are not really a factor, but DSA kind of is operating as an opposition party. So that's something we're trying to build up more and more. It's happening more and more in red states, in swing states. We just elected a city council member in Atlanta who's fully a DSA cadre member, Kelsey Bond. We have a city council member in Louisville, Kentucky, JP Lininger. There are other examples we could keep listing, but more and more, like we've built up the strategy in a lot of these bigger, historically pretty liberal cities, but this is increasingly applying to more parts of the country. And it's our task as a national org, as a collective membership, to synthesize these approaches and really figure out like how do we keep building up these party functions that are already kind of emerging across the country. So yeah, we're not just endorsing people on paper and then maintaining a checklist of like whether they checked off enough things or they broke with us on these things, but like more and more. Like our ability to hold people accountable comes through the expectation that like, we made you happen and we can, if you do break with us enough, we can withhold that, and then good luck.
Have you guys, I'm just curious, have you guys actually done that in any case? I have no idea.
I don't think so, but it gets bandied about. When we hear threats of it, like somebody's like, we're going to do it. We're gonna. And we're like, all right, tell us how it goes. If it happens, it'll happen like in, Boise, Idaho or somewhere like that.
So it's basically, it sounds like it's like, but like local chapters that got specific candidates locally like elected would be the ones to be like, all right, we're going to like pull this plug on you. If they would be the ones to decide to do that, basically, is what I'm understanding.
Unendorsing a candidate?
Or sorry, I guess. Yeah. I guess I'm just curious.
There's a lot of examples of that. It
happens all the time. I mean, not all the time, but it certainly happens. I mean, it's, if it's happening less and less these days as our candidates are more consistently sort of cadre members.
Yeah.
It happened more in the sort of early post-Bernie days when it was like, we'll find any progressive who will say the word socialist and we'll endorse them. It was, which made sense at the time, right? It was like, we need to get visibility. We need to get what power we can grab from wherever. We don't need to do that anymore. And so we don't see it as much anymore. And so we don't see as much of that sort of tension because, which is not to say there's not going to be some. And I think there have been some spicy moments where, general conflict of people who are working together a bunch like boils over and they can't work together anymore usually for a while. And then it gets better again.
No, that's a super interesting evolution, though. It kind of goes with what you were describing earlier. It's like kind of like there's the Bernie Sanders like era when he was like running for the primary, and then there was like the sort of AOC getting elected era and the squad era. And I think that we're definitely in like a new era where all those politics of what's been learned before is evolving to maybe work in a way where, like you said, like you've got more people coming out of like DSA like organizing than before. And I do want to ask, because a clash I kind of see coming. I hope not. And the reason I hope not is because I don't want this war to happen. But like, again, as we're having this interview, it's, maybe that by the time it's published, there could be actual strikes on Venezuela. Like the clouds of war are gathering. It's really alarming. And, this administration and Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller, like leading the charge, seem pretty committed to like completely destabilizing a Latin American country, like in the Libya model kind of way. So as we're watching a country of almost 30 million people potentially be, undone, if this goes forward, I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you guys have seen, I'm not sure you've seen, but I've seen, at least in my Twitter feed, this clip of Zohran Mamdani that, has kind of gone viral in the past few days. It's from like 2 months ago, so it's not a recent clip, but it was with Jorge Ramos, ahead of the election, and he kind of puts him in this position where he's like forced to either condemn or not condemn Maduro and Cuba.
Politically, I think I have to ask you this question. Just going back to socialismo, do you think that Miguel Díaz-Canel in Cuba is a dictator?
I haven't thought much about Miguel Diaz, I'll be honest with you. I think mostly about these 5 boroughs and how we can actually deliver affordability for New Yorkers.
But do you think Nicolás Maduro is a dictator in Venezuela?
I think he has done many a horrible thing.
But again, do you think it's important that you say that they are dictators and that people understand here in New York that you are not aligned with them?
I think it's clear and it's important for me to showcase how this is a vision for the people of the city. And as you said, it is in stark contrast to the experiences that many others have had. And I think when I hear from a number of Venezuelan New Yorkers about what drove them to come to this city, the conditions that they had to live through, I understand their skepticism. I understand their caution. And yet I have found in them an understanding that my vision is one that is distinct from that experience.
Yeah, but I wonder if you're reluctant to call them dictators in Cuba and Venezuela.
I'm not reluctant. I just haven't thought about them that often. I'll be honest with you. I think that Maduro's government is one of repression. There's no question about it. And I think
it's in Cuba.
Sorry?
And also it's happening in Cuba since 1959.
And I think that the repression that, whether we're speaking about Cuban New Yorkers or Venezuelan New Yorkers, that they have had to live through is a repression that stands in a clear contrast from what our vision is here.
And people online, at least, I don't know how real this is in real life, but people online who are upset about this coming escalation against Venezuela are disappointed by that answer. And I'm not saying that to necessarily like attack him yet, because he's not in office. And also, like, I don't know as mayor how exactly he would really be influencing foreign policy anyway, but he is not just mayor of New York, he's a national figure on the left. And so what I think he says about these things, especially as we're on the precipice of a potential war, I think it really, really matters. And I'm kind of reminded of, I'm not reminded of, a friend of me reminded me of, which I didn't know this happened. There was a New York City mayor called John Lindsay during the Vietnam War era. And he was this prominent liberal Republican. I think he eventually became a Democrat, but that was because of his strong opposition to the war in Vietnam. And he ultimately, because of how outspoken he was, became this kind of like national anti-war figure. He even lowered the American flag to, in honor of the students who were murdered at Kent State. And it was as an anti-war gesture. He spoke at mass rallies, and he's not some radical leftist. So I guess I'm saying all that to say, like, as we're in a moment where Venezuela could be attacked, do you see Zohran Mamdani being the kind of person who will be kind of giving his voice and leadership to the anti-war movement if it moves forward? I mean, this really is like an Iraq War WMD kind of moment. So yeah, I'm just curious. You guys know him. He's from your party. I hope he ends up being that figure. But what are your thoughts on sort of that stand? Because we know that anybody who has a label socialist in their bio is automatically like put in this position where they're forced to condemn the Latin American left as like evil dictatorships. But right now, the Latin American left is like under the biggest attack ever.
Yeah. I'll start out by saying internationalism and anti-imperialism are core commitments of DSA, and our organizing for the past few years has, it's gotten stronger and stronger year by year. We have a very active Cuba solidarity campaign to end the embargo and, by extension, to end sanctions against countries like Venezuela. We have a delegation in Honduras right now that's observing the elections, and, watching what's happening there in real time is, just totally an example of everything you're saying. So we're very committed to support, being in solidarity with all these governments, with people, or, across the global South who are under the boot end of U.S. imperialism. And on Cuba, our fundamental position in DSA is that the U.S. embargo is the primary cause of the hardships that Cubans face every day. It's our duty as Americans to end that policy and give Cubans a chance to decide the future themselves. This is what we both of us were just in a delegation to Cuba. Was it only a month ago?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this was DSA's second delegation that we sent, 40-something members from all over the country who were leaders in chapters across the country. And it was such a powerful experience, We went to this delegation, I think, just a few weeks after the interview that you mentioned with Jorge Ramos, which was really a gotcha interview where I think Zohran was put on the spot. And we had really good conversations among, like, many of us were, not thrilled about exactly what he said, but just at the end of the day, like, he did emphasize the embargo itself being the problem, and that this is the primary thing that must end from within the United States. This is something he's committed to. There are plenty of New York City DSA leaders who really emphasized this with him. He showed up at Cuba solidarity events over time, including, I think, possibly during the campaign. So, this is something that for sure we're going to hold him accountable to. And I think he and his office will be committed to, doing whatever is possible from within this office to work towards ending the embargo on Cuba. And, I think we have the expectation that if this drive toward invading and doing regime change in Venezuela.
Crazy. Like, I can't believe
we're
you're
gonna-
saying that. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.